Welcome one, welcome all, welcome to another episode of Fan Team Radio. I am your host Shayem Khan, joined as always by my co-host Chris Odorizzi. Today we're going to be breaking down the 2023 Singapore Grand Prix. We're going to be talking about Carlos Sainz finally taking a W and how Ferrari outplanned Mercedes on this race. We'll be talking about Liam Lawson's success and how it's adding more complexities to Alpha Tauri's driver pairings. Where do we go from here, Liam? And we'll wrap up with talking about Red Bull and a weekend to forget for them and where do we go from here for them. Chris, what's up?
Finally, a smooth operation for Ferrari. Great race by them. It was an amazing weekend in the sense that it was all up at the air from day one, and it was nice to actually see Ferrari and amongst other teams actually have some good strategy and put in a good race. So curious what your thoughts are on the whole Ferrari out in the front.
Yeah, I mean, we say Ferrari, but we really mean as Carlos Sainz.
Yep.
And he absolutely put everything that he had into this weekend. He qualified incredibly well and just took that momentum into the race itself, which is something that, quite frankly, one of the big pitfalls of Ferrari is transitioning from qualifying to the race day and continuing that success. Great work by him, outmaneuvered both Mercedes and out strategized his own team. At a certain point his team didn't even really know what he was doing and he had to reassert himself. And I think that's what's needed, right?
Yeah.
It's we talked about this at length before, Chris, and I think this is a culmination of Sainz continuously pushing back on his team when he feels like they haven't made the right call, whereas Charles sometimes gives in, and we saw the results of that this weekend. His decision to pull back and maintain a 1.5-second gap to Norris was incredibly smart and a calculated gamble that paid off well for him. For listeners that are tuning in, he essentially kept Norris within a DRS range, and when his team told him that there was a 1.5-second gap, he tried to maintain that. He could have just lost discipline and extended that gap even more, but I think he understood really early on that if he were to do that, then the Mercedes would overtake Norris and then subsequently himself. So with the last few laps of the race, which were probably the most exciting laps of this season, in my opinion, he was able to keep those weary tires on the track and keep those Mercedes behind him. So absolutely, hats off to Carlos Sainz. Just incredibly well deserved P1 from him.
Yeah, I mean, you take Carlos, like the whole season, he's been trying to sort of be his own engineer at times in the cockpit and has had been basically telling the team what he wants to do, and sometimes they agree or disagree, and this time he took it into his own hands and just said, I want to know what the distance is to Lando every lap so that he could keep it within that DRS range. And Singapore is an incredibly difficult track to pass on, so as long as he has Lando outside of a diveable distance from the Mercs, then he could keep them because these guys don't want to crash trying to lunge into Lando and take each other out while they're battling the McLaren as well as themselves. And so Carlos was just brilliant in this execution on sort of keeping Lando just far enough to where pass wasn't viable when there's really only a couple of very small passing points on the track. And even though he wasn't the fastest guy on track, he dictated the pace and it paid off, and he absolutely deserves that P1 spot.
Quick question, Chris. Do you think that Norris being behind Carlos Sainz was more advantageous for Carlos than if Leclerc was behind Carlos Sainz this weekend?
I mean, absolutely. I think
because both of them were previously at McLaren together. They're noticeably friends off the track, and you can feel some of that love in between the strategy in this week's race. And I'm curious if you think that Charles would have probably had the same reaction as Norris if he would have played ball or if he would have tried to overtake Carlos.
Listen, I think a little bit of that plays into it. listen, I mean, I think Lando, if he thought he could win a race, he would try to. After losing in Sochi all those years ago and never really having the opportunity, I think he would go for the win. But with the his tire degradation, and his just lack of pace, I don't think he was going to be able to pass the Ferrari on merit. So I think he was happy to sort of play the, the best bud team game to like secure the podium spot. Because if he gets passed by George, he gets passed by Hamilton too. So I think he knew like his best spot was to get P2 and to hold the Mercs behind, and he's going to take that opportunity. And we saw in the previous race that Charles was willing to fucking put it to the test with Carlos, trying to pass him, trying to dive bomb him, and giving Fred Vasseur a heart attack.
Yeah, how
When
they didn't crash still, goes above me.
right, so I think if Leclerc is in P2, which is where he probably should have been if there wasn't that double stack holding for traffic pit stop that they had where he lost a few places, as well as kind of being forced to place the team game and drop a few seconds back, creating a gap for Carlos. I mean, listen,
Which I think
Carlos,
was also due to the fact that Mercedes double stacked, and I think that was Mercedes' strategy, essentially impeding what would have been an optimal strategy for Ferrari to get both of their drivers double stacked. So I think that was a little bit of Mercedes' plan, almost disrupting what would have been the optimal positioning for Ferrari.
yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that as well. But you know, there was a lot of 4D chess going on here between all the teams, and ultimately, Ferrari was able to not screw it up too badly, and Sainz took it in his own hands, and yeah, I think a few things fell in his favor. But it was a great race to watch, and I'm happy for Carlos. I think he deserves a few more wins in his book.
Yeah. Something interesting to note about your perception of McLaren's speed versus Ferrari, and if we're just kind of brainstorm this out a little bit more. Norris actually had a better straight line speed than George at a certain point, which allowed him to kind of keep positioning in front of George and in front of Lewis. So who knows? It seemed like McLaren had the straight line speed to get up to Carlos. What I would probably assume is if Carlos didn't maintain that 1.5 second gap for Norris to have DRS and keeping up that good faith, if you were to extend it out, maybe try to make like a 2-3 second gap, first of all, his tires would have degraded a lot quicker, but I think that would have indicated to Lando to race hard. And I think Lando might have even taken, at least competed a lot closer to Carlos, and all that strategy would have just gone out the window. So really well timed, an incredible symbiotic relationship between two different teams to keep the third one away. You would think that this was a race that Red Bull would be involved in all the way in the front, but we'll talk about them a little bit more in this segment. So let's turn our attention real quick, Chris, to Mercedes on the other end. If we were to rank team strategies this week, I don't think it'd be unfair to say that Ferrari had the best, and Mercedes had it right after them. Um, a couple of things here that worked against Mercedes, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Chris. So in Julian Palmer's post-race breakdown, he spots three different reasons for Mercedes potentially kind of giving way to Norris and to Sainz. The first one is right at the start of the race. Hamilton has to give back 2 spots because he had to go off track. He took over Lando and George, and he was behind them before the braking spot, so he had to give those back. And turns out at the end of the race, those were the 2 spots that he really needed.
Yep.
The interfighting between George and Lewis, once the race was in the final laps, that caused Norris to be able to extend his lead a little bit more to the Mercedes. And then just a pure fact that Hamilton had pace on those mediums, and his car was a lot stickier than George's was. His racing lines were a lot more optimal. And I'm not entirely sure why the team, I'm sure they have their reasons why the team didn't come in and kind of give orders to have Hamilton pass Russ and then potentially go fight Norris, and then have, build that DRS for Russ to come at behind them. They might have even gotten a P2, P3, or even a P1, P2, P1, P3. So those are three reasons that Julian Palmer pointed out, and I thought it was really uh really astute, I guess, in terms of really what went wrong for Mercedes. I'd love to hear from you, Chris. Do you think they should have kept Russ where he was? Do you think they should have pulled him back a bit, let Hamilton go fight for it? What were your thoughts on Mercedes' strategy today?
Um, First of all, so I just want to say that I think that I love the call to bring him in for the mediums. They had so much pace on everybody else, who were able to catch back up to the podium spots very quickly. And I think, um, without Carlos's intuition on how to keep them back with DRS, they would have potentially won to the race. That being said, this is a really difficult situation because from a team standpoint, George did outqualify Lewis, P2 versus P5 in qualification. So George sort of earned the right, so to speak, to be ahead of Lewis. And then on top of that, when we're having a four-way battle, when we only have like 5 or 6 laps left, the milliseconds, the hundreds, the tenths count so much, and swapping cars is very difficult to do so in such a clean way that you're not losing time. And so I think Lewis had the better shot of winning the race, but like swapping the cars could easily create such a gap that they can't make that up. Or, a bad situation happens, they lose too much time, they crash into each other. So I don't know what the right call is here, because Lewis did have more pace, but George deserved to be ahead because he just was. But ultimately, I do think that if Lewis had been ahead, we would have a different result. So it's a hard call to make. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad Lewis ended up on the podium anyways, because I think that's where he deserved to be. But in the moment, I don't think as a team principal you can just say, okay, George, you've had your 2 laps, like give it to Lewis, because I think it's a very difficult maneuver to execute on track.
Yeah, and I think that's what was also going through Mercedes strategies and leadership heads is George earned the position and he qualified he out qualified Lewis in quali. So you definitely don't want to pull back on your driver at that point.
Sure.
This goes into even greater thought of what happens when Mercedes has an incredibly competitive car and they have 2 drivers that both want to, chase the championship. Like, are there going to be guidelines and internal conversations that define D1, D2, and what happens in situations like this? Or do they just keep letting the 2 drivers duke it out, which, makes for some great racing and great content, but could ultimately, shoot them in the foot. So let's turn our conversation real quickly to my favorite rookie on the track right now, Liam Lawson. So German outlet Auto Motor and Sports recently reported that the Alpha Tauri has decided to retain Yuki Tsunoda and is expecting to offer him a contract extension in the coming days, and that they're also retaining Danny Ricciardo, a fan favorite, which is interesting. They have a 3-way kind of gridlock with drivers. There's not that many open seats left, especially given that Zhou Guanyu just got re-signed to what's Sauber now, or will be Sauber. The seat that's still open is at Williams. Former F1 driver Karun Chanduk, he went on to state that Liam Lawson would be a great candidate for that Williams seat alongside Alex Albon. So, Chris, I want to hear 2 things. One, what were your thoughts on Liam's race in general and in context to his rookie peers? And what does a world look like where Liam Lawson and Alex Albon are paired for 2024? And how many points do you think they'll get? What do you think that they'll be?
Well, I'll start off by saying that I'm a huge Max Verstappen fan, but I was watching this race in the car on the way back from a road trip from Florida, and I had my AirPods in, and my wife was driving, And when Liam crossed the line to knock Max Verstappen out of Q2 in quali and put it in there, I like freaked out and almost caused an accident because my wife had no idea what was going on. But I was like, yes, like because like I love watching underdog stories and just watching this rookie come in and take out the Red Bulls from Q3 for the first time.
His
And
parents love him. He loves his parents. I love that
yeah,
part.
it's all happy feelings. But yeah, no, watching Liam come in and just, you know, he's not very flashy, but he's like super consistent. He's a great driver. He reminds me a little bit of like Oscar, just like a cool, level-headed, good ultimate racer. And I think he absolutely deserves a chance to be an F1. And so watching, in his first points in this race, like 3 races in, and not due to other people's slumbers, just due to his good quality, good race pace, and staying out of trouble. So um I really like the potential pairing of him at Williams with Alex. I think if AlphaTauri does retain Yuki and Danny Rick, like replacing him with Logan, I think that would give us probably, and I'd have to look back. I think it would be one of the best F1 grids that we've ever had, like in terms of like just overall quality. Like that would put Liam Lawson and Oscar Piastri in as the rookies, which we don't have any more Gotifis, Nikita Mazepins, Nick DeVries, those kind of people. And then everyone else on the grid is either a former world champion or just a super solid future good driver. So I
We're
think
the
it'd be
son of a billionaire.
or the son of a, oh my God, forgot about Mr. Stroll, man. Yeah, well, he wasn't in this race, so I forgot about
We'll
him.
talk about him soon.
But yeah, no, I think you know, I don't think I think Liam deserves to either replace Yuki, replace Danny, or replace Logan. And not having him on the grid next year would be an absolute shame. So super impressed by him in all 3 races he's been in. And I think it'd be, like I said, a shame to not have him in one of these seats.
Yeah, I mean, the delta between Alex Albon and Logan Sargent right now is incredibly large. And when you're talking about Formula One as a product that you want to, take globally and expand more and provide the best product possible to the customer, there is really no reason that this man shouldn't be on an F1 grid or F1 team. I think Logan Sargent has had a chance to show what he's got, and even in this weekend's race, he didn't finish, and it was all due to his own mistake, right? It wasn't even a huge crash. It was something that he ran into a wall after a turn and dragged his debris all the way across the track to the pit lane. So it's just really uh underwhelming, right? And I think that's even worse than disappointing. Because disappointing is, Mick Schumacher, right? He had those incredibly outlandish crashes, and it made for good TV. But this is just underwhelming. It's just like boring to watch. And in respects to Alex Albon, who's putting a really good Williams car, on showcase, it's not acceptable. I feel like if you're trying to expand the sport and really be competitive against other sports in America that do really, really well, I think having Liam Lawson on Williams will at least get them into. I think they'll be in contention with Alpine for sure. I think they'll have two very capable drivers. They'll have, James Vowles' team, and then they'll have that car that they're going to iterate on for next year, which is a really good foundation right now. And I also think with kind of the lapse in performance and expected improvements from Alpine, between that and the rise of Williams this year, they'll probably net out at the same place next year if they were to take on Liam Lawson and lose Logan Sargent. That's just kind of my thoughts there. I think Logan Sargent can, step down into another like practice driver or something at another team. I think he still has some more development left to do. But if you have someone like Liam Lawson, someone like Oscar Piastri, who are fully baked, essentially, I would love to. It would be a shame to not see them on the grid and potentially, you know, lose any potential opportunities due to something like this.
Yeah,
So I
you put Liam Lawson in his first race is Zandvoort, difficult track. It's raining, complicated. There's safety cars. There's rain on, rain off, inters, never driven on before, and he's improved over all three races that he's been in. He's shown like small bits of improvement. He went from almost making points to even closer to then making points. And Logan's had, the better part of a season, and he's not only not shown improvement, it's just kind of the same, like you said, sort of disappointment, boring to watch. And like when he was dragging his wing around the track, it almost felt embarrassing because I was like, you're causing like debris. This is going to ruin somebody else's race because you can't control the car into a turn. Which it ultimately did. Or like I know Alonso had like debris stuck in his wing, and I think other people had issues. So like I just, like you said, he needs to probably find another way to better himself, to get himself up to speed if he wants another chance at an F1 seat. But he just doesn't seem to be improving enough to continue on next year. If we had seen more improvement and like little glimmers of hope of him being able to perform really well, then I could see extending his contract. But if they do it over Liam, then I think that would be a shame.
I mean, he could cascade down to Haas, which would be a match made in mediocrity heaven, right? It'd be an American team, quote unquote, with an American driver. And, both of them are kind of in similar standings in terms of where the car is at and where the driver's at. Nico and K-Mag are extended through just next year, right, Chris? I think
Yeah.
they have 1 year contracts. So it could easily be a plug and play where those two, one of them ride out their contracts through next year, and then they turn to Logan, who hopefully by then has had some shots of showing what his improvements have been. So I can definitely see that being uh, a realistic future. But I definitely think above all, Liam Lawson should be in an F1 car permanently for 2024.
He deserves it.
He deserves it. Cool. Let us turn to your favorite team, Red Bull.
Yeah.
A lot of things happened this weekend. So they're affected by the traction and the heat that Singapore inherently has. I think there were some rule updates to raise the rear part of the car, which also caused them to lose a little bit of that downforce that's famously been their bread and butter this year. That's kept them in front. Weren't able to make it back in the practice section. So a lot of things working against Red Bull this week. Before I get into some of the other pieces of their race, I'd love to just kind of hear your initial thoughts on what went wrong this week. What do you think they could have done better? Any general thoughts? I'd love to just hear from you as a fan.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously I love Red Bull and I wanted to continue seeing history get made. Um, Although, we had already hit that 10 race mark, so I was fine with either outcome. Red Bull had already sort of predicted that Singapore would be their Achilles heel from the start of the season. They felt street tracks were their sort of weak link, and Singapore is notoriously very different from other tracks. So I think that they anticipated to have issues, although the issues probably were a little bit larger for them than anticipated. And that's probably due to that TD, as you talked about, the regulation update. So, but it was kind of interesting to see them struggle so much. They were sliding around the track. They couldn't get the balance right. They were making changes from each practice session into quality and just kind of looked a little sloppy, very uncharacteristic of them. But and Max was obviously furious coming out of quality and getting knocked out. But then I watched some of his post quality interviews, and he seems very level headed about it and not that upset, and just sort of expected. And they were asking him if he was going to fight for the win. He's like, "No, there's no shot at me winning this race. It's no big deal." So that kind of surprised me that he kept level headed after he's notorious for being a hothead. But ultimately, I think Max had a much better race than Sergio. And if the safety cars had aligned a little bit better for them, I actually think Max could have probably pushed on for a podium. Who knows? But taking it P11 to P5 was already impressive enough, considering they couldn't get their car in that sweep spot. But he seemed to have a good last stint on the mediums, just like Mercedes.
Yeah, that first VSC really threw a wrench in their race today. It really extended the lead that the front runners had already on them. So there was really no way for Max to make up that delta, even just on pure pace. So definitely a couple of things went sideways for them. Again, Singapore is a hard track to overtake on anyway. So definitely something that I don't foresee being an issue going into the next couple of races to finish out the season. But I guess this was like a perfect storm for them. So a couple things I want to touch on here, Chris. So there there are three summons from the stewards for Red Bull this week, and no penalties. Um, just kind of reading some quotes here. So while Verstappen was handed a reprimand for impeding Sonoda at Singapore Grand Prix, no Alpha Tauri representative was required to be at the FIA hearing over the matter. And the three things that they were talking about was Verstappen stopping in the pit lane, impeding Logan Sargent, and then impeding Sonoda in quali. All of which would, be contested if it was probably another team. But the fact that there was no AlphaTauri representative to kind of speak on their behalf or, really, stand up for them, it the concern here is that the child team of a parent team is going to inherently have the interest of the parent team, in mind, and potentially even facilitate the parent team's success in certain instances, which could be an unfair advantage. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Chris. What do you think? Do you think this is just haters hating, or do you think there's actually some credence to this?
I'm glad you brought this up because in the moment, I was actually speaking with Sam on this, and we were both a little bit furious. Like, as much as I love Red Bull, like I don't want to see favoritism in the sport. And I don't want to. Max is already, you know, P11 or whatever he was. Like, I don't want to see um them not giving him a penalty just to try to continue to watch another win or have a good television. So I definitely think the whole AlphaTauri incident was a slam dunk penalty and probably deserved it. And the reason why he didn't is because the sister team probably said, like, it's like in American football where the other team rejects the penalty because, they have a better outcome by rejecting the penalty than not. Like, so I definitely think that that's kind of what happened in here. The pit lane incidents were a little bit different because um GP had his little fake lawyer moment where he's like, "Oh yeah, Max, the car looks good now. You can go." And it's like, it's tough to argue like the he said she said incident in the pit lane. Like, Max can say, "Oh yeah, the car was not working and I couldn't get it going," and then GP said the thing he did over the radio. So, you know, what can you do? So, but yeah, that Tsunoda incident definitely, impeding on track. Of course, there's a lot of traffic, a lot of things, a lot of issues, but ultimately, I definitely think three summons, no penalties is a little sketch. So I think it's something to look at in the future. But we've had definitely other incidents with other teams get slam dunk penalties over much less. So I don't like it, but at the end of the day, um, it is what it is. I definitely don't like the brother sister relationship team in terms of unfavorable advantages, and I hope we can find a solution for that in the future.
Yeah, it really shines a light on the stewards' inconsistencies, like you mentioned. They've called this for Leclerc, for Pierre Gasly, for Sonoda himself in races just this year. So the fact that they let three slide, it's a little unnerving. And even if you take a look at Checo's race, so he makes contact with Sonoda into turn five in on one of the laps. He doesn't commit to the turn beforehand, and then he kind of just bumps into Sonoda, and then he again bumps into Alex Albon, and he only gets a 5 second penalty for it, but takes Albon out of the points because now Albon has to go into reverse, which takes forever, and by that time he's already been passed up by three or four other drivers. Uh, Obviously, this happened to Lewis, where he got a 5 second penalty a couple of races ago, but was able to make up pace on Alex Albon just on pure race pace. So it, calls into question: is a 5 second penalty enough? Should there be a revised penalty for situations like this? But even when you're not looking at Max, Checo also made several contacts in today in this weekend's race, which didn't seem to really cause any kind of discernible issues for them. They were still able to place in the points. So, P5 and P8 outcomes, not too bad considering that they didn't even get into Q3, right?
Right.
And I think if even two of these were administered to them, in a more punitive fashion, they would have been, I would think, out of points. I think Liam Lawson and some of these other racers would have been higher up. I think K Mag would have been number like P8, P9. That would have been crazy. But definitely something to consider going forward is what happens to this child parent relationship. I know Williams has that to a certain extent with Mercedes, but not to the extent that Red Bull has with Alpha Tauri. So, does this mean that Alpha Tauri should divest and or Red Bull should divest Alpha Tauri and sell it off to another company like an Andretti? I don't know. I just think that this is, again, it just kind of mars the 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 experience for viewers and for fans.
What's definitely going to
Zach,
get, oh, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I was going to say it's definitely going to get more interesting next year after Helmut's comments a few weeks ago that, AlphaTauri is going to rebrand and they want to get as far away as they can from AlphaTauri creating their own car and to do everything they can within the regulations to copy the Red Bull car. So we might have a much more competitive AlphaTauri team next year with whatever the new name is, and it'll be really interesting to see this child, child parent relationship of a team if they're competing for podiums and getting in the way. So I'm curious what sort of the quote unquote team orders will be and what the favoritisms will be when, this team is maybe potentially putting it against Red Bull. So, uh,
Yeah,
right.
I'm curious what happens when Vegas gets involved. Naturally, the expansion of a lot of these sports franchises and leagues are dependent on online gambling now. Even ESPN, NFL drafting and fantasy leagues once started off, without any kind of money attached to them. They're
Sure.
honestly just, to get people to watch more football and more basketball, more baseball. And then all of a sudden there's a skew to them now, with DraftKings and MGM and all these like online betting platforms, which you need to legitimize your sport in ways that there is no question if there's wrongdoing, right? I think once Vegas starts getting more involved, I mean, the inaugural races there this year. So to think that the higher ups at F1 uh, is not bumping elbows with those leaders at MGM and at like those kinds of betting platforms, I I think that'd be naive to not think that that's where they're headed, in the next couple of years with this aggressive expansion. And along with that does come a lot of scrutiny into your sport and ownership and what the relationships are, especially when it's only 10 teams, so I'd be very curious to see how expansion into the American market, which comes along with betting and sports gambling, is going to affect um, the rules around, can a company own, can one racing company essentially own another one, and have that called into question. Zach Brown's on record. He thinks the team's going to be back at the top. Red Bull, meaning Red Bull, at the top of the weekend in Japan. He's expecting their Singapore performance was just an anomaly, and not the norm. So he coming from Zach Brown, trusted source, I believe him. What do you think, Chris? Do you think Red Bull is this is cause for concern, or do you think it's just a quick stutter step in a otherwise pristine uh season?
I think we're going to see Max win the rest of them. So I definitely think they're going to be back on top. I think this was just a track that they knew that they were going to struggle with. If you're going to design a car to win races and you know that you're going to have one weak link, you're going to just take that loss and win the rest of them. Either way, it's no matter what happens for the rest of the season, the writing's on the wall. Like Max would have to DNF the rest of the season to have any chance of losing the championship. So I think, within the next race or two, we're going to have the constructors and the drivers locked up. So even though I do think that Max will be back on top, the history books are written. We're not going to have that perfect season. We're not going to get to like 11, 12, 13 wins in a row. So the only thing left is to get those two trophies, and I think that's already locked up. So um, I do think that they will be back on top, but I'm more excited about, Bahrain 2024 and seeing where everyone's going to stack on top against Red Bull at that point.
Yeah, I think this is just a blip on the map. I think this is not going to be something that they should be concerned about going into the next couple of races. I think they'll course correct. I don't see Max having two back-to-back blunders of a weekend, and I can't say the same for Checo, but I think that he'll actually be back in contention and definitely going to be in Q3 of qualifying for sure at the very least. All right, let's talk about winners, losers, and hot seats. Who do you have for your winners this week, Chris?
I think we're going to be pretty aligned here. I think, super happy for Carlos, smooth operator, like getting a win in this season when Red Bull has won 100% of every race so far this year was an amazing task and feat. Super happy, and I hope that we do see a little bit more. Imagine that picture at the end of the race and the last 10 laps or so. We have two Mercs, a McLaren, and a Ferrari. And imagine if Red Bull was in that mix too, and we just had four or five different teams battling for wins at most of the races. I'd be super excited to have that. So yeah, Carlos was able to pull it off and did a great job. Super happy for him. And then, your favorite racer of the year, Liam Lawson, like what a debut, points in his third race. Can't get any better than that. And like we said, I hope he gets the seat signed. And then just super happy for Norris to continue putting the McLaren up on the podium. I do think he'll eventually get a win. Unlikely this year, but yeah, those are going to be my three winners for today.
Nice. I'm right there with you. All three of them are on my top winner circle. I can't say enough about Liam Lawson. I'm incredibly excited to see his growth as a racer. Incredibly excited to see what team he lands on. I also think Williams is deserving of him just as much as he is deserving of just a seat in general. And I think Alex Albon is deserving of a partner who really facilitates his success, who actually pushes him more than his last few driver pairings. So definitely all on board with you. I have Lando Norris up there as well. I'm gonna add K-Mag to the mix. Just qualified well this week. I think he came in at P6 for quali and then finished at P10 and got some points in there. Although it was due to the fact that ST Bestie and Valtteri, Yuki, and Lance all, either didn't finish or just wasn't even in contention. So I'm still going to give him the W. I think he really needs it after the season that he's had, especially where we thought Nico was kind of overtaking him more and more each week. So good stuff from K-Mag this week, especially on a track where a lot of the cars were, seemed like they were skating on ice at certain points. For losers, I'll start with losers. So I'm gonna put Red Bull as my losers for the week. Again, an anomaly like Zach Brown said, but not very often that I get to put them in this in this box, so I'm
Yep.
really gonna relish it. So losers,
Loses.
Red Bulls. Um, Also gonna put Yuki Tsunoda in there. I would have put Yuki in the hot seat, but then after kind of really the report from that came out saying that he's gonna get his contract extended, I upgraded him to just losers. Tough to see the guy have another week where he's not able to race. Just a blunder from Perez, and it really cost Yuki at the end of the day. So second week in a row he's not able to show his stuff. George Russell, I'm not going to say too much more on the kid. I feel bad for him. He clipped that last piece of the Qatar sign going into the turn. He followed Norris's racing line, and Norris clipped it, but not enough to spin him out. And then Russ hits it, and he spins completely out. You could hear the frustration in his voice. Almost the same exact tone as Esteban Ocon. SD had a pretty damn good race going into pretty much the whole race until his car just stopped. So same energy, different drivers,
It
and
it
then
reminded me of that Charles Leclerc moment from earlier in the year, which is like, no, like just hearing the complete utter disbelief and frustration of your race ending after such a good performance. Definitely hard.
I don't know if it's just because they bleep out everything or they edit it, but no wouldn't be the first thing that comes to mind when I would crash. I think
Also,
I have a lot of four-letter words that would be much more satisfying.
I definitely feel like we've heard some beep 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 beeps on the broadcast, but the one thing that does surprise me is if you've seen an F1 steering wheel, there's definitely a button to talk. So are these guys crashing and then pushing the button just to yell into the radio? Are they like, hold on, I need everyone to know that I'm fucking pissed? No.
No,
It's like guys
I
that, yeah.
I mean prima donnas, right? I
Yeah.
mean, but I'll tell you who's not a prima donna. Fernando Alonso. He went down fighting without saying a damn word. Tough week for Alonso. I think he just threw the hat after a certain while. Just didn't even get near points. This is his first one of the year. So definitely a tough race for him. Tough week for Aston Martin. Yeah, those are gonna round out my losers. Who do you got, Chris?
Yeah, nobody different than you. I would have paid money. You know that like George has rubbed me the wrong way ever since his crash with Valtteri at Imola a few years ago. I'm warming up to him slightly, but I would have paid money for his race engineer to come over the radio and say, "What happened? You were forecast for a podium."
Hey, who's to say that someone didn't say that?
I would
They
have
just probably
loved it.
didn't press the button.
Yeah, just didn't press the button. That would have been hilarious. But yeah, no, Red Bull as well. Definitely a really tough weekend for them. And like I ultimately I feel worse for Yuki just because this is, like you said, the second race in a row that he hasn't been able to do anything. He's sort of DNF on the first lap or first couple of laps. And I don't know if you saw Yuki's car. Actually, everyone thought that he just got a puncture or that like the bump something happened, but there was a picture of Yuki's car where the entire side of the floor was missing. So his collision with Sergio, it's shocking to me that Sergio's car wasn't destroyed as well, given how much damage was actually on Yuki's car. He was missing basically the right side of his car. So unfortunate for him. And not only is it unfortunate to miss two races in a row, but it's super unfortunate to miss these races while he's sort of on the testing ground against Liam Lawson and Danny Rick. You're not even able to sort of prove yourself. Because if he goes out there and super outperforms Liam, then it kind of makes Liam look a little worse. But also, maybe it's a little lucky that he's DNFing and not finishing 17th behind a point scoring Liam. So it's hard to judge, but yeah, it sucks that your race keeps ending so early due to other people's issues of your car breaking down. So but
Yeah, I mean, I get the sense that he's shown enough
yeah.
for Red Bull leadership to consider him staying. And like I mentioned in the last episode, I just didn't see them letting Danny Rick go, especially after everything that they did to kind of get him in seat after all of the marketing that went around him as well. I just didn't think that they'd let him go after something like this. So uh it's funny to see where the ruthlessness ends for Red Bull and where their limits are there.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about hot seat. Who do you have in your hot seat this week?
Got to be Lance Stroll. I mean, I know we've talked about him ad nauseum, but what is this? What is the future for this guy? Like, we keep getting um blurbs from like Mike Crack and other people that defend him wholeheartedly that like, oh, we just haven't given him the car. And it's just very obvious that he's been in F1 a long time. So like he's had years and years to develop and improve. And these mistakes that he keeps making are very, they're kind of amateurish mistakes. Like he was obviously a little trying to push the car a little too hard, trying to pick up pace that he just can't control, which ultimately led to a very crazy crash. It was very actually similar to Senna's crash in Imola, the same sort of losing of the control, smashing at the wall, losing the entire uh either left or right side of the car. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's the right
And
side of his car.
yeah, so like without modern safety technology, Lance could have potentially lost his life in that accident. The onboard showed his head like whipped around pretty violently, and so I understand why he didn't race, but like at the end of the day, we're not going to get a championship drive out of him. And so, as long as his dad wants to keep putting him in the seat just to go around the track and occasionally score some points, that's their prerogative. Um, but ultimately, like gonna keep putting him in the hot seat until they get rid of him.
Yeah, he's also on my hot seat this week. Terrible looking crash, terrible crash in itself. Both from a safety perspective, but also from a salvageability perspective. I don't think the engineers had anywhere near enough time to get that car fixed and back on track. I mean, you know, he's a good driver. Like if you consider like all the other buy-in drivers, like he's not the worst,
Sure,
but he's still a buy-in driver that is not putting a car that has a lot of potential in the places that it needs to be or that it's expected to be. Especially given the fact that the stable of talented drivers is starting to grow. I think even more so than last year, Chris, is like we're starting to see new faces that are actually legitimate, and maybe some slightly older faces like Alex Albon really coming into their own, and even people like Yuki that you can see has some forward momentum going for them. But I don't see any of that for Lance. I just see him kind of going in circles and you know essentially just putting a hole in the budget. So definitely on the same page as you. I just don't see how much longer he has on this team. And that's not in a bad way. Not to say like, oh, he's gonna leave, like, or he's gonna be ousted. I seriously just don't know because his dad could just keep bankrolling his seat, and no one would be able to kind of say otherwise. So you know a weird situation to be in. Again, curious to see how Vegas would affect something like this, right? Can owners of companies just buy seats for their kids? It's definitely something that impedes competition, I feel like.
sure.
I also got Logan Sargent on the hot seat. To me, he is on a hotter seat than Lance Stroll, especially given the scenario that's kind of transpiring around him. Even though he is at Williams, just kind of the recent reports of Liam potentially talking to Williams, puts another definitely puts another stake in the coffin for Sargent. I don't think he's going to be able to redeem himself, especially not this year. I don't think he's going to be able to redeem himself top of next year. Uh, I do think that seat deserve like a good driver because that Williams car is in a good place now. It looks like you also have him on your hot seat, Chris.
He actually changed my hot seat a little bit in this conversation because initially it was just Lance, and then really put two and two together that Sargent deserved it to be in the hot seat. We just talked earlier about how much he hasn't improved throughout the season, and just how these simple mistakes, after the better half of the year in F1, you shouldn't just be making very minor mistakes constantly. And so I definitely think that as much as James puts faith into him, and I think that you need to lose that faith at some point and realize that there's all these other drivers who have much more raw talent that are like waiting on the sidelines for a seat. And when you only have 20 of them, it's it's time to give it to someone. And hey, if the FAA does approve Andretti's application and they do get a seat, there's another opportunity for Sargent to like race with an American team and see where he can go. But ultimately, when we have these 20 seats and we know that there's the Liam Lawsons of the world like waiting in the wings, and potentially others as well that are winners of F2 or people that are racing now on the sidelines, I just don't think that you can give a non-improving rookie a multiple years test drive.
Yeah, I mean, nothing more for me to say there. I completely agree with you. I think that there are now more deserving people to be in seats. I think a year is more than enough time to prove yourself. And if you don't pull the plug at a certain point, then it's just the onus is on Williams, right?
Right.
All right, so let's outro here, Chris. So we are gonna be in Japan in next week. Not us, but the F1 drivers will, and we'll be watching from afar. Who are your predictions for next week?
Yeah, I think Max is going to be back on top. I definitely think that it was a blunder, but for 1 week, but I don't have enough faith in Sergio to keep putting it on the podium as much as you might. But I also I don't think Carlos is going to win another race this season, although he's definitely shown enough ability and promise to. But I think he'll make another podium, so I want to put him on the podium. And then like that raw pace out of Hamilton, I definitely think he has the ability to put up there. So those are the three guys I want to put up there on the podium, and I think that's what we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I have something similar. I have Verstappen, Sainz, and Perez topping out my podiums. Listen, I think Checo is still in a Red Bull car.
That's true.
And it's going to take a lot for me to. It's going to take consecutive weeks of failure for me to be convinced that some other car is going to be able to top them. I think just based on the momentum that Carlos has picked up, and the speed that Ferrari actually has, optimistically, I'm hoping that he'll be able to kind of position himself into the top three. And I don't think Max is going to allow himself to come back and have another disappointing week. So definitely see him back in the top of the pack. So yeah, Verstappen, Sainz, and Perez are going to be my top three.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. Japan's always a good race and tough technical track. So yeah, it'd definitely be exciting to see what happens if Red Bull will get back on top, or if we're gonna have a bigger shakeup for the rest of the season.
Yeah, excited to see it. All right, Chris, you want to take us out?
Yeah, man, guys, if you enjoy listening to us as much as George Russell likes looking at himself topless in the mirror, then please do, give us a like, give us a comment, give us a review, and we'd love to hear, as we've mentioned every week. We just want to engage the conversation with the fans. Please leave us feedback as much as you can. You can comment on your platform of choice or email us at fanteamradio@gmail.com. But otherwise, we look forward to continuing to bring you this coverage of these races and future more conversations together.
Yep, everyone, we'll be right here for Japanese Grand Prix on the 24th. Until then, everyone be well and goodbye.
See you guys.